Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for the second rulemaking workshop on House Bill 1543. The main topic for today's rulemaking is on the proposed rules for alternative compliance pathway for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. I'm Annalyn Bergen, the Clean Buildings Compliance Lead and part of the rulemaking staff. Other presenters today include Donnie, Shivani, Dylan, and Jeff. This slide represents our agency's purpose. If you're unfamiliar with Commerce, we offer a broad range of programs and services. Commerce touches every aspect of community and economic development. Commerce has over 400 grants and programs. We work with local government, tribes, businesses, and civic leaders throughout the state to strengthen communities so that all residents may thrive and prosper. So here's today's agenda. If you've been with us before, you'll notice the beginning slides are the same. We like to repeat information for those newcomers. I'll give an introduction of the rulemaking process. I'll go over the flow and timeline, and then I'll go over intentions and scope of our rulemaking. I'll hand it over to Shivani. She'll provide a summary of comments that we received since our last rulemaking workshop. Dylan will go over the survey results specific to alternative compliance pathway. And Donnie will go over the House Bill 1543 language and our proposed rules on alternative compliance pathways. So when Donnie presents this information, we'll pause for questions and comments, kind of give you time to engage with us. If you want to speak, Jeff will give you the opportunity. Just raise that virtual hand. So we hope that you, after today, you feel informed enough to make comments, stay engaged, and continue to be part of the process. So this is the rulemaking staff. This is only a part of our whole staff for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Just know that our team is dedicated to providing timely, actionable, and clear information about the state's Clean Buildings Performance Standard and to help guide you through the rulemaking process. So I'm going to go over the rulemaking process. The Clean Buildings Law is referenced in RCW 19.27a.210 to RCW 1927a.260. When House Bill 1543 was passed, it officially amended parts of the RCW. So the Clean Buildings Performance Standard includes ASRE Standard 100 with the state amendment in WAC 19450. If you're new here, terms like RCW and WACs are acronyms that sound technical, but they're important for understanding how the government works, how laws are enforced, and how you, the public, shape the rules that affect how building owners comply with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. So just think of the RCW as what? It explains the law, what the law must, or it explains what the law says must or must not happen. When House Bill 1543 became law, it became an RCW. So the WAC is the how to follow the law, and explains how the government enforces it. So the rulemaking process is written in the Administrative Procedures Act. That's kind of what
Annalyn, sorry to interrupt. Your audio seems to have cut out there.
Hello?
There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. My internet must be lagging. I apologize. Let me go back. So the rulemaking process is written in the Administrative Procedures Act. This act will guide us through the rulemaking process. It begins with filing the CR 101, which it's to indicate to get a process of amending the rules started. So for this rulemaking cycle, we'll be hosting about 3 to 4 workshops. We are in the second one. During this time, we'll be drafting an environmental justice assessment, which I'll explain a little further in the next slide. After a series of rulemaking, the Clean Buildings team enters the next phase, finalizing the draft rules. Team files the draft rules with a CR 102 form, which can also include a small business economic impact statement. Filing the CR 102 starts the formal public comment period, which usually lasts about 30 days and concludes with a public hearing. Commerce holds public hearing after the CR 102 is filed to get the public's feedback, hear concerns or suggestions, and learn about unintended consequences. After reviewing all the comments and making any needed changes, the agency adopts the final version of the rules. This is filed in the CR 103. The rules are adopted 30 days after the CR 101 filing. Once adopted, the rule becomes part of the WAC. So in 2021, the Healthy Environment for All, also known as the HILL Act, passed to promote reduction of environmental and health disparities in Washington state in order to improve the health of all Washington state residents. Required by the HILL Act statute, the Environmental Justice Assessment, what I'll be referring to as EJA, are an assessment for agencies to determine the potential impacts of agency activities on overburdened communities, vulnerable populations, and tribes from all categorized significant agency actions. So since this rulemaking is considered a significant agency action, an EAJ is required in order to involve the people and communities most impacted. So there are two stages to the EJA. So Commerce just completed the draft and we'll post it posted on our website, and it's also posted on the OFM dashboard. Jeff, if you could put that link in the chat. This EJA will also be emailed to the registrants. You can review it and provide comments. So once the comment period once the comment period ends, likely in October, Commerce will integrate your inputs and findings from community engagement and repost the final EJA on the OFM dashboard and the Clean Buildings website. So we'll accept comments for the duration of the comment period, which will conclude with 2 dedicated meetings this fall. It's a fall tribal briefing for the tribes specifically, and a HEAL community involvement session for all impacted communities and interested parties. So after those meetings, Commerce will produce the final EJA, incorporating all feedback received. So this slide depicts the cycle of public comments during the workshop phase. After each workshop, a draft rule will be emailed to registrants and posted onto the website as soon as possible. We'll give the public around 2 weeks to comment. We'll summarize the feedback in the subsequent workshop, and where this process will kind of repeat itself. Many have questions on, when can I submit comments? Is it just within those 2 weeks? We like to say 2 weeks so that we can give ourselves enough time to incorporate it into the draft rules. But at any point during this rulemaking process, please feel free to submit comments. So we just ask participants in our workshops to be respectful, use the Q&A field, and our goal is for the rules to reflect our work together, and our rules will only benefit from these workshops being inclusive and participatory. So we just ask everyone to be respectful and show good manners. We encourage everyone, especially those impacted building owners and those who work on the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, to share their input and help shape the final rules. So this slide displays the rulemaking timeline for House Bill 1543. The dates are subject to change. Today is our second rulemaking workshop. The next one is scheduled for August 13th. We hope to conclude the entire process by December of this year. So many have voiced their concern about upcoming compliance deadline, which is in 2026, and applying for an extension, other exemptions, or perhaps even an alternative compliance pathway. I want you to know that we hear you. We want you to know that we hear you. The timeline that I showed in the previous slide shows us codifying the rules for building owners to apply for extensions, other exemptions, or alternative compliance pathway before the 2026 deadline. So please understand, you will not be able to apply for these exemptions or extensions until these rules are finalized. So how can you help? Continue to participate in these rulemaking workshops to stay informed. Provide us with your comments, share your expertise and your perspective. Comments are not just for edits or ideas, they're also a way for you to show support on proposed rules. Our next rulemaking workshop, we hope to provide proposed rules that improve clarity in the existing rules. So the scope of our rulemaking is rules and documentation and timeline for extensions, exemptions, alternative compliance pathways. Just note that some alternative metrics will not be explored this time around. Some metrics may not be feasible because they require study and may not fit into that rulemaking timeline, as I mentioned before. So we will explore them in future rulemaking. You know, Commerce has secured some DOE funding to do an EUIT and implementation analysis to better align our standards with other jurisdiction and to study the EUIT, the EUIs that have submitted for compliance. We want to make sure we have an informed decision before developing future metrics, and we can only do that with better data. So we will be making other necessary rule changes for consistency and alignment. You'll see that during our next rulemaking workshop. We will not be updating the existing energy use intensity target, building use types, and shift normalization factors. We will not be creating rules for the incentive program. And finally, we are not considering updating to the new version of ASHRAE Standard 100. I'm going to hand it over to Shivani for to provide some comment summary.
Hi, my name is Shivani, and I'm an AmeriCorps Fellow in the Buildings Unit supporting the Green Buildings Performance Standard. I'd like to thank you all again for submitting your comments and reviewing the proposed rulemaking. We have received 5 comment submissions so far, and these comments are from nonprofits, building owners, higher education groups, utility providers, and architecture engineering organizations. So I'll be summarizing these comments, which I have categorized based on topic. Next slide, please. The first group is extension and exemption comments. There were some comments that the compliance light extensions are inequitable because they allow some tier 1 buildings more lead time to comply when others have already been working towards compliance. There were some comments that the justifications behind extensions were unclear or too lenient and perhaps already addressed by investment criteria or conditional compliance, and concerns with building owners falling behind in applying for easy tier extensions. However, some approved of financial hardship and inadequate funds as good additions to extension criteria. And the last was that nonprofits that serve communities should be given more leeway in extensions. Next slide, please. The second category of general comments, there were a few comments about swimming pools and the way their energy usage is calculated. There was a request for a guidebook with more examples to make extension cases more understandable. We also received a suggestion that property change in ownership or compliance status should be included in real estate disclosures, and some commentary on alignment with BEPS compliance and CBPS requirements to reduce administrative burden. So seeking greater alignment of BEPS with CBPS. Oh, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I don't think we had a break.
Yeah,
I think it's on
Okay.
Alan's side.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, we had a suggestion that for aquariums in particular, due to their unique operations, they are seeking another classification for more realistic compliance with CBPS to improve their energy efficiency instead of seeking an exemption. Next, I'll pass it over to Dylan.
Hi, everyone. On June 2nd, Commerce opened a survey form seeking suggestions for rulemaking. These survey results, which we have discussed a little bit, highlighted many areas of responses. Today, I'm just going to highlight some of the takeaways from the submitted alternate compliance pathway responses. Next slide, please. As of today, July 23rd, we've gotten a sum total of 69 survey responses, representing many different counties within Washington, as well as respondents from California, Colorado, Oregon, and New York. Respondents represent a variety of different buildings scenarios, including Tier 1, Tier 2, district energy systems, exempt buildings, and some not applicable, so like private citizens or other participants. Next slide, please. Respondents also had a variety of different roles, just like the survey we did at the start of this one. We asked the question of what roles people were in and what industries they were representing. And we found a lot of building owners, facilities personnel, project managers, and some of the industries that were prominently featured were schools, real estate, and consulting. Next up here with the alternate compliance pathways, respondents favor, as we can see on the left here, alternate compliance pathways. And on the left, we see that more than 60% of survey respondents found energy use intensity reductions over time or a percentage reduction in EUI to be an appropriate alternate compliance pathway, while at least 50% favored categorical compliance or cost maximums for building investments. In addition, on the right, we summarized some of the additional suggestions that we received. And these submissions are summarized, but they some of the top ones included were pathways for buildings achieving a carbon reduction metric, implementation of low-cost, no-cost measures, site-level compliance, building certification, and more.
Dylan, before we move on, I'd like to pause and recognize some of these submissions. Luke, can we go over like just a few of these? Do you expect to cover some of these in our proposed rules? And if not,
Yeah, thanks for the question, Annalyn. So, a lot of these results from the survey have kind of informed the work that we've already done in the proposals of exemptions and exceptions. And you'll find through today's workshop, you'll see some of that reflected in the proposals for alternative compliance pathways. It may not be specifically clear. For example, we do not have a provision for a proposal directly related to low cost or no cost EEMs. However, we do have a proposal today that kind of covers those, and I'll save that for Donnie here. And the standard as it stands today already does have a pathway for low cost, no cost EEMs, and that would be the investment criteria. Carbon reduction metrics, you can see that's a popular one here. You can see from the previous slides that Dylan showed that Seattle area was a pretty popular spot for people to comment, and I believe a lot of that had to not just be associated with population of building owners subject to the standard, but also they are subject to Seattle building emissions performance standards. So I think the alignment between the clean building performance standard and Seattle BEPS is of utmost interest to folks in that market. So we do have some provisions in our alternative compliance pathway proposals that address some of the concerns with folks subject to BEPS. But we, as stated in previous workshops, we're not directly working on a greenhouse gas emissions compliance metric at this point. We will be doing that in the future. It's going to take a bit more of an effort to do a study and determine what that program would look like. And we really wanted to get going quickly on the rulemaking so that we can implement these increased exemptions and exceptions or extensions as soon as possible. So building owners that are getting close to their compliance dates could take advantage of any new provisions that are beneficial for them. So like Annalyn mentioned, we're going to have these rules codified by the end of the year.
Thank you, Luke. I'm going to pass it to this next slide for Donnie to go over proposed rules.
Hey, Donnie, before we go over the proposed rule, Jess has been patient and had her virtual hand up. Just want to see if she had a question on any of the information presented earlier. Jess?
Yes.
Brianna? You have your hand up now? Actually, let's go back to Jess. Can you unmute Jess, Jeff?
Yep. All right. We've got this Brianna.
Yeah, sorry, I could not find the unmute. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on, could you mind just explaining, if we could go back one slide to make it clear what the threshold cost maximum option would look like exactly?
Dylan, do you want to cover that?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. This was a compliance pathway suggestion that would put an upper limit on the costs required to be spent on energy efficiency investments. So let's say there is a building that identified substantial measures through the investment criteria pathway that would require a lot of investment. This might be an upper limit on how much they would be required to spend.
But they would come into compliance, the building owner would come into compliance if they spent up to a certain threshold. Is that what that means?
Yes, that's what that suggestion was.
Even if the performance metric was not met?
Correct.
Okay, and so then some sort of criteria for determining what would be reasonable as a threshold would need to be determined.
Indeed, yes, it would.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks, Brianna, for the question. Jess, do you still have a question? Jess Marshall? Okay. All right, let's move on with the show. Back to you.
All right, thank you. Everybody, my name is Donnie Westfall, technical specialist here with the Clean Buildings team. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll be covering just the proposed rules for today, but first I want to quickly review some of the more significant items that were called out in House Bill 1543. So this bill was the result of the Clean Building Work Group's legislative report, which included recommended changes to meeting the compliance standard. The bill contains three key components. The first two we've discussed in the previous rulemaking webinar. That was the ability for Commerce to grant timeline extensions to building owners actively working toward compliance, and the addition of a few new exemption categories. The third key component is one we'll be discussing in more detail here today, and that is the authority for Commerce to create and adopt alternative compliance pathways for the Clean Buildings Standard. Next slide. So we've developed two proposed alternative compliance pathways that we believe are in alignment with the intent of the RCW, and then we can implement within this current compliance timeframe, as Luke alluded to earlier, that can give building owners some flexibility to meet compliance within the next few years here. As Annalyn mentioned earlier, Commerce intends to explore introducing an emissions-based compliance metric to the standard for future compliance cycles, but it'll take quite a bit more effort with the study and that sort of thing. So it just really wasn't feasible for this year's rulemaking. Next slide. All right, we'll go one more. Okay, so the two alternative compliance pathways that we've proposed here. The first is that buildings that do not buildings that do not comply by meeting either the EUI target or through the investment criteria of the standard may choose to pursue compliance through one of the two alternative compliance pathways that we'll cover here. The first is a proposed alternative pathway is a minimum EUI reduction. So tier 1 covered building owners can comply with this performance metric if they reduce their building's weather normalized energy use intensity by 15% over a baseline measured WNUI. The baseline WNUI must be measured using 12 consecutive months of energy use data monitored in a period not to exceed 5 years prior to the building's compliance date, as outlined in Annex Z 3.1. So they would have to measure a baseline WNUI from within a 5-year period prior to compliance. Right now, we're proposing that this provision would expire in the 2046-2048 compliance cycle timeframe, with the thinking that buildings would need to align with final metrics by the 2050-2053 compliance cycle to align with goals that are outlined in the state energy strategy. So this approach would require an energy audit in accordance with Section 8, similar to buildings that do not currently meet the EUI target. It does not require an ASHRAE level 2 necessarily, as does the investment criteria, but can be less stringent and more targeted to help a building identify efficiency measures that'll get them to that reduction over their baseline EUI. And then M and V would be done just via benchmarking and utilizing Energy Star Portfolio Manager, similar to how we track buildings that are complying by meeting the energy use intensity target. We would have them submit kind of that baseline WNUI and then show the post-implementation WNUI to confirm that 15% reduction. So we're proposing the 15% reduction over the baseline benchmark, but are open to input from you all, as we'd like to establish kind of a reasonable reduction that projects out well over future compliance cycles. If we look at the 15% trajectory through 2050, that equates to a 75% reduction over 5 compliance cycles or 25 years, right? Additionally, our thinking behind this was that our current EUI targets were set 15% below the mean EUI for each activity type. So we thought the 15% was a relatively attainable number, and it's really geared towards buildings with those higher EUIs that are just kind of out of reach for the targets right now, but that it gives them kind of that more attainable, more appealing target to kind of reach as they work towards that 2050 sort of end goal. As well as for buildings that don't currently have EUI targets. So rather than having to pursue compliance to the investment criteria, it gives them sort of this alternate pathway to make investments and start chipping away at that EUI. I want to note too, we did consider a renewables specific alternative compliance pathway, but ended up not including it here as we believe that building owners could choose to invest in renewables in this case to achieve that 15% reduction over their baseline for the 5-year compliance cycle. I'm going to pause here if there's any questions.
Thanks, Johnny. That was the question I was going to ask you, was about
Okay.
renewables. You beat me to it.
Okay.
You mentioned an acronym, and some people may not be familiar. You said MNV.
Oh, thank you. Measurement and verification. So essentially being able to measure and document that EUI reduction. Yeah, thank you. We live in a world of acronyms, so they slip out sometimes.
Well, we got a question. Let's see. Was there any consideration of varying the reduction targets by building type?
It wasn't something we considered. Not by target type. This way, it's kind of 15% can apply just across the board to the different activity types, rather than like a specific EUI reduction. We felt a percentage reduction was more equitable across all activity types.
Great, thanks. Beth had her hand raised. Can you unmute Beth for me, Jeff?
Beth, when you're ready, go ahead.
Can you hear can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you just say that sentence again about like you considered a renewables pathway that a building owner might be able to comply by for
Yeah,
adding solar,
it
or you
was,
said no to that?
yeah, it was a consideration when we were thinking of alternative compliance pathways, but we felt it kind of just fell into this one. You know, having some sort of X percentage of the building's overall energy use met through renewables. But really, if a building owner wanted to invest in renewables to lower their EUI 15%, they could do that and comply with this alternative compliance pathway. So we felt it wasn't needed to have that
It doesn't.
extra.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a
pathway on
standalone.
its own. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So just clarify for the audience, Donnie, is an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit required for this scenario?
No. So an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit would only be required for the investment criteria pathway in the standard. Currently, if a building's not meeting their EUI target, they have to have an energy audit to identify efficiency measures that'll bring them into compliance if implemented. It doesn't have to be a level 2. It can be more of a targeted assessment of the building. In similar vein, that's what would be required here. So it's just that an energy audit is required in some capacity just to identify those measures that could bring that building into compliance by reducing the EUI 15%.
So, real quick, and then we'll take it to the virtual hands that are raised. So compliance is every 5-year cycle. So does the building need to continue to reduce its EUI every compliance cycle?
Yeah, it would be an option though. Like, so this first compliance cycle, you would measure your baseline EUI kind of as that baseline starting point. You would then need to reduce 15% that EUI by the compliance deadline. That reduced EUI would then, if you wanted to continue down this alternative pathway, that would be your next starting point, right? So then that following compliance cycle would be 15% lower than the 15% from this compliance cycle. But at the other, alternatively, a building owner may just choose at some point to just meet the EUI target, which is obviously still an option.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on to the other questions, Stephanie has her hand raised. Jeff, can you unmute Stephanie?
Yeah, Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. I'm wondering if you could clarify for me. So, you choose to use this minimum energy use reduction alternative compliance pathway. Is that actual, like, fully in compliance if you were to meet that? Because then in the blue text below, it says a building shall be granted conditional compliance. So, yeah, clarification on that would be good.
Yeah, it would be full compliance if you can, document M and V by the compliance deadline. So if you are measured and verified that you've actually achieved that 15%, through 12 months of energy use data, along with your energy management plan and operations and maintenance program, you would achieve full compliance. The conditional compliance provision would apply here if you had your energy management plan, operations, and maintenance program, and all the energy efficiency measures implemented by the compliance date, but you needed more time to conduct your measurement and verification to document that you've met that 15% reduction.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
To the question, Stephanie. Let's clarify. Do these compliance pathway only apply to, or actually all of these proposed rules, do they only apply to tier 2?
No, these are tier 1 specific right now, as tier 1 has a compliance metric or compliance performance metric component to the compliance requirements, right? The tier 2 doesn't have to meet any performance metric at this time.
Oh, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
How about we take it to Danielle? Can you unmute Danielle? Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead, Danielle.
Hi, yes. Thank you, everybody. I was just wondering about the for as far as like wholesalers and grocery stores, situations like that, where there are contractual obligations for temperature regulation, is there any proposals to consider those things?
It's not something that we've considered at this time, but we do welcome input, comments. You know, that's what really helps us kind of inform some of our this rulemaking process. So please, if
Okay.
you have suggestions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks. If an initial ASHRAE level 2 energy audit was completed with conditional compliance, the pathway then, does this alternative require yet another audit, or can the qualified firm assess the reduction and report that?
So if an initial audit was done, can they use that audit to identify measures that'll reduce the EUI?
Let me read that again. If
Yeah,
an
I think.
initial, sorry,
No, go ahead. Yep.
I think that's what they.
Yeah, I think we have some provisions within the standard currently that allows you, building owners to utilize energy audits from within 5 years of their compliance date. With the thinking that, you know, getting beyond that time frame, the energy audit may need to be redone. Building systems or operations may change. So, you know, ideally, it's an audit that's within the last 5 years, and they could use that to kind of assess their needs.
So, Sarah's curious, how does the investment criteria path not already provide this option? With that addition of taking into account a cost threshold or exceptions where an inability to finance exists.
Yeah, the investment criteria is a little bit different in that, you know, an energy audit would identify cost-effective energy efficiency measures that would then need to be carried forward and evaluated through a life cycle cost assessment. And then that would provide you, a building owner, with what's called an optimized bundle of measures. So those are cost-effective measures that need to be implemented. So cost effectiveness may rule out certain things. With this alternative pathway, a building owner could just simply implement energy efficiency measures to lower their EUI 15%. So it's a little different approach. It wouldn't require the life cycle cost assessment, or Form D, Form D or Form F for compliance submission. It's a little more straightforward, I guess.
Soundy.
Yeah, I'll just
Yeah,
note.
Luke, you want to add to that? Yeah.
I'll just note that where the investment criteria requires that ASHRAE level 2 audit, which is a more
Yeah.
extensive audit. In most situations, a lower level audit will identify 15% savings for that building at that time. So it may not be necessary to go all the way to the level 2 audit. You can always get a plethora of good information from a level 2 audit, well beyond a level 1 or a targeted investment grade audit. But this is just an alternative pathway for those that choose to avoid the investment criteria.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Luke. Can you guys talk about the M&D requirements to show the 15% reduction, or if it remains the same as the current?
Yeah, this would be pretty straightforward and fairly similar to just documenting compliance with the EUI target. In that approach to compliance, meeting the target, you just pull in your energy use benchmarking data from Portfolio Manager to document that the building's WN EUI, weather normalized energy use intensity, is below the EUI target. In this case, we would need to document a baseline weather normalized EUI, which we can still pull across from Energy Star Portfolio Manager by selecting a date range that's within that 5-year period prior to the compliance date, and then a post-implementation WNUI from Portfolio Manager. So we just essentially pull over to 12-month periods to document that 15% reduction in the building's weather normalized EUI.
So how and where do we report this 15%? that the 50% was achieved since the audit?
Yeah, it'll likely take, if these rules are adopted, it'll likely take some modification to our Clean Buildings portal, but it'll be function similarly to our current Form C, where we've already established a connection with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and we're able to pull the energy use data and EUI metrics over into our portal. So kind of in a similar fashion as I just mentioned, you'll likely just select a date, 12-month period within that 5 years prior to compliance to establish the baseline UI, WNUI, and then provide another 12-month period kind of post energy efficiency measure implementation that's documenting that 15% reduction.
Thanks, Donnie. Nick has questions, last suggestion. Can there be an exception to EUI reduction? Can there be an exception to EUI reduction timeline if it's a large capital project, including energy efficiencies that took place within the last 10 years as opposed to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, the time frame, we picked 5 years, but again, this is, a great time for, garnering feedback. So please provide your suggestions. It's something we could take into consideration. Also considering that we are proposing these potential extensions for compliance for buildings that are actively working towards compliance. So factoring some of these other things in, I think there are ways for building owners to kind of work with some of these scenarios to sort of achieve that compliance that they're looking for.
So do you see the 15% reduction compliance pathway being used by a majority of the building owners currently on the EUI target compliance pathway?
It depends. I think this one is really geared towards folks that have a higher starting EUI. Buildings that are either at or just slightly above their current EUI target, which, there could be a lot of building owners in that situation. Reducing 15% is going to allow them to meet the EUI target anyway. So I would imagine we'll still see quite a few folks meeting the EUI target.
So after the first cycle, does the baseline weather normalized EUI have to be the compliance weather normalized EUI submitted or used for the previous cycle submission?
Yeah, so the thinking is you'll establish the baseline for the initial compliance cycle, reduce 15%. That 15% reduced EUI that you've submitted for compliance would be your baseline for that next compliance cycle.
So if this compliance, one that Ian asked, if this compliance light path is taken and 15% reduction is not met, what are the ramifications?
Compliance light, the 15%, it would be similar to kind of the other provisions within the standard if the target or the investment criteria is not met. We haven't fully fleshed out the policy on that, but I would imagine it would be similar, kind of reassessing, implementing more measures until you can reach that 15% reduction, or potentially seeking an extension. There could be some options out there.
And just to clarify, our proposal for compliance light is an extension for 2 years and this is an alternative compliance pathway of a 50% reduction.
Yep.
How is so not super related to this, but how is financial hardship defined? We have developers receive guidance to receive more money from their investors. We've had developers receive guidance to receive more money from their investors.
Yeah, I would suggest that you refer to our guidance document library on our website. We have a guidance document specific to the financial hardship exemption that goes into more detail than we'd be able to get into today, but it covers all aspects of the financial hardship exemption. Looks like Jeff might have posted a link to our website in the chat.
Thanks, Luke.
Can you confirm that there's no O&M required as building deemed compliant with 15% reduction established over baseline?
Yeah, the O&M and energy management plan are still requirements for all covered buildings complying with the Clean Building Performance Standard. So there's no exemption for the O&M requirements.
Thanks, Donnie. I think I've gotten all the questions related to this. Let's move on to the next proposal.
Okay. Okay, so the second proposed alternative compliance pathway we're referring to as prescriptive electrification. So tier 1 buildings would be able to comply with this performance metric if they replace existing fossil fuel consuming space conditioning and service water heating equipment with electric heat pump equipment. Heat pump equipment would need to be sized to meet at least 90% of the building's peak design load as required in the Washington state codes. This still would allow for 10% of the building's annual space heating to come from combustion equipment or potentially electric resistance in order to accommodate emergency heating or periods of peak heating demand during extreme weather events or other situations like that. And this may go without saying, but this pathway can only be used by building owners for one compliance cycle.
Are you coming to the link with us?
Our thinking with this one is that space heating, service water heating are two of the larger energy consumers in a building. By electrifying and converting these systems to heat pump technology, building owners would have a more prescriptive approach to compliance that should still result in a significant reduction in EUI and would really help the state work towards its emission reduction targets that are outlined in the state energy strategy. So we have had lots of requests to provide a carbon emissions metric pathway, but as Luke and Annalyn both alluded to, we need more time to conduct a study to really implement a greenhouse gas emissions intensity metric. But with this pathway, requiring electric heat pumps would move buildings to less carbon intensive and more energy efficient equipment, and it'll still significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions as well as site EUI. Additionally, this pathway could be beneficial for building owners in Seattle that are subject to the future building emissions standard and would give them an option to really focus their scopes of work for building improvements on something that can decarbonize the building and help them comply with both the standards. We would like feedback on this proposed pathway. With this one specifically, we want to hear from you. Should we allow, right now we're saying heating and service water heating. Should this be specific to heating equipment only, as this could still have a significant impact? It could be 40 to 60% of a building's total energy consumption. This could be beneficial for scenarios where a building may have fossil fuel fired heating equipment, but electric service water heating. Yeah. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, let's give people a moment to digest what you
think about that one.
The question I wanted to ask about this.
Yes.
So since this is only used for one compliance cycle, that means they should still take into consideration energy efficiency measures. Right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the thinking is if you're converting heating and service water heating over to heat pump technology, you're going to get a significant reduction in EUI, most likely. But yes, you can only electrify a building one time. So ultimately, beyond that one compliance cycle, they'll need to meet the EUI target or comply with the investment criteria, or potentially the 15% EUI reduction.
Thanks, Donnie. Comment coming in from Bill. The power company is still using a big portion of natural gas to create electricity. Thanks for your comment, Bill. To a question, would the 10% backup rule be combined fossil fuel and electric resistance like the district energy system? Sorry, it went away. District energy system decarbonization.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know, Luke, if you have any input on that one. I would, we kind of framed it in a similar fashion to the decarbonization pathway for district energy systems, understanding that, sometimes the investment to cover that last 10% demand in some of these more extreme weather events or emergency situations can be fairly costly. So giving that kind of buffer to allow for systems to be sized to that 90% threshold. But yeah, having that electric resistance or natural gas or fuel fired as a backup.
Do you want to add to that, Luke?
No, I think Donnie did a good job. I just gave the thumbs up. Yeah.
Great. Let's take it to Brianna. Can you unmute Brianna? Jeff?
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how this is actually a viable alternative, because it just seems like costs on this would be so high that most tier one building owners who are already struggling to comply, why, like, how is this a viable alternative for
Sure.
them? Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, no problem. I mean, part of this was kind of figuring out a way to help, our building owners in Seattle that are already working potentially towards complying with BEPS through electrification of their building systems to hit those greenhouse gas emissions intensity reduction targets. So some way we could sort of tandem or kind of help those building owners who are already sort of working down that path focus more on that scope of work. And it gives kind of more of a prescriptive approach to where you don't to necessarily factor in EUI. Understanding, yes, it would be a large investment, right, to convert these systems over, but it is just one of the alternative pathways, right? There's still the EUI target. You can still meet the EUI target. You can still do investment criteria, which would only require implementation of cost-effective energy efficiency measures, or the 15% EUI reduction.
Thanks, Donnie. Thanks for the question, Brianna. How about Stacy? Can you unmute Stacy, Jeff?
Stacy, go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, so on this one, I think we're really excited about this option. I'm just curious. I'm going to propose maybe a hypothetical, maybe or not so hypothetical situation. We've got some like cargo facilities that do quite like exceed their EUI targets, and our energy audits have identified measures that would bring us into compliance, but none of them are cost effective just due to the cost of construction at our facility, all the security requirements and all of that. And I'm wondering, because we've been trying to pursue the investment criteria, is there some sort of like, and this is the complication, maybe that it doesn't matter, but like if we identified that we needed to replace our heat pumps, 5 years from now, and we replace them with electric heat pump options, like maybe we comply through investment criteria this first round, but by the next 5-year cycle, this could be an option for like real compliance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, investment criteria is real compliance. So yes, that would be an option because it can only really be utilized for one compliance cycle, right? If you're converting to or if you're electrifying the heating and service water heating equipment. So yeah, by all means, if a building wanted to pursue the investment criteria during this initial compliance cycle and then utilize this approach to compliance for that next compliance cycle, that would absolutely work.
Yeah, and sorry, if you could remind me again, which of those options can only be used for one compliance cycle? Is that the investment criteria?
No, that's the prescriptive electrification, the one we're talking about right
that
now.
makes sense. Yeah.
So
right.
yeah.
Thanks.
Yep.
Would existing all electric resistant buildings being excluded from using this?
It's a good question. That's, those are some of the considerations I think we need to think about. If it's converting electric resistance to heat pump, that could be a potential option. Please submit your feedback and give us kind of those comments and suggestions. We'd love to hear them.
Yeah, and keep in mind that some of these provisions or some of these alternative compliance pathways can be utilized, and you could pursue this prescriptive electrification, and as a result, not only you installing heat pumps and meeting the requirements of this pathway, but you're probably reducing the EUI by 15% and perhaps even meeting the target. Especially if you're if we did consider converting from electric resistance to heat pump as a valid prescriptive electrification compliance pathway, that's likely to at least cut the EUI by 15% right there. So maybe not need it to be prescriptive electrification, but certainly worth considering because we know a heat pump's going to be at least twice as efficient as electric resistance in general.
Thanks, Lou. Stacy, did you still have another question or? Jeff, can you unmute Stacy? Not sure if she wanted to.
I didn't have any other questions, just
Okay.
lower
Your
hand.
arm must have been getting tired. It's up. Thanks, Stacy. So does this compliance pathway qualify for the early adopter incentive?
That's a
Would-
good question.
Yeah, it would only qualify if the early adopter incentive if they actually made the target, met the target. So keep in mind the early adopter incentive program for tier 1 buildings is legislatively mandated to be only for buildings that start out at least 15 EUI over the target and reduce their EUI to the target or below.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, Lou. So from this perspective, does it need to be the replacement of all fossil fuel HVAC and surface water heating equipment? I can imagine some large buildings may want or need to do it in phases, more than 5 years.
Yeah, the way we've proposed it, it would need to be all space heating and surface water heating equipment meeting 90% of the building's peak design load. But again, feedback is welcome. I like to hear input from industry experts and building owners.
So Andy asked, what about where there may be separate tenant spaces with their own water heaters, et cetera? Is this for a single use piece of equipment in the building, or could the 90% also allow for some flexibility on areas?
Also a good question. I mean, the standard is typically applied at a building level. So the way it's proposed now, it would need to be building-wide heating equipment and surface water heating, meeting that 90% of the design load.
Great, thanks. And then Bill writes comment, in hospitals, we're using a lot of steam boilers and hot water boilers. Pumps are not going to work.
That's
Okay.
That's part of the reason we use the terms service water heater. That would not include process hot water loads, so such as in hospitals when you use steam or real hot water for sterilization and other process loads.
Thanks. And then can you clarify for Nick how many 5-year cycles are included in this bill?
There's no 5-year cycle. I mean, well, I guess I take that back. So the percentage reduction over time, we've proposed to phase that out by the 2046 to 2048 compliance cycle. Just basing that off of the state energy strategy, which has greenhouse gas emissions reductions targets by 2050, thinking that by the 2050 compliance cycle, those buildings would just need to meet that final potential final metric target.
Yeah, there is no real end date for the Clean
Yeah.
Building Performance Standard, so it could be the year 2400 and but in theory by 2050 EUITs will be met, and that would meet the state energy strategy's goals by 2050. Again, if we are charged by legislation to reevaluate the energy use intensity targets in 2029. So at that point, we can kind of map out what the targets are going to be for subsequent cycles. And the building owners can kind of really use this 15% option as a way to kind of map out their trajectory. And maybe that they do 17% this first cycle. It's not really designed to be a pathway that'll get you to the target. It's, because as you can imagine, as time goes on, it's going to get more and more difficult to get 15% of savings. The more efficient your building is, the less easy it is to find cost-effective measures that will reduce the EUI. So our theory is people can use this upfront for buildings that are well above their target. But as they get closer to the target, at some point, they're just going to meet the target and not have to continue down that 15% trajectory. Some of them, I think we mapped out one that was maybe twice its EUI, and it was meeting the target by well prior to the 2046, 2048 cycle.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Luke. Okay. I'm just going to give it a moment. If there's other questions, you can add it to the Q&A and I can recite it, or you can raise your virtual hand and we can have you unmuted so you can engage with us. If we don't have any more questions, we'll go over the next step and we'll stay a little bit if you have questions. Or you can always submit a comment, either bringing us your ideas or your feedback or your words of support for one client's pathway or another. See no other questions. I'm going to have Jeff kind of go over the next steps.
Thanks, Annalyn. And again, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. We can go to the next slide. So as Annalyn mentioned in the beginning, is that we do record these meetings, and then we also post them to our website. And so this is where you may find the website or the information for the rulemaking sessions. If you go to our website, commerce.wa.gov/CBPS, and the link is in the chat as well. And then to the rulemaking tab, this is the page that you come to. This is where you'll find all the recordings from the previous rulemaking sessions. Today's session will be on the website shortly, within a couple days after today. You'll also find the comment form, the proposed rules, and any of the links for the rulemaking materials that we have will also be posted on this site. Coming up, if we can go to the next slide, is our rulemaking session workshop number 3, August 13th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. We'll put a link in the chat as for folks to register, but this will be tentatively our last workshop of this rulemaking session. Workshop 3 will go over clarifications, and we'll also do a comprehensive review. So again, the link is there in the chat, and we will also include the link to register when we send out the materials later on as well. So, and with that,
thanks, Jeff.
you can go ahead to turn it back to Annalyn.
Okay, we'll stay a while, but that really essentially concludes our workshop. We would like to thank you on behalf of the Ping Buildings Performance Standard team. Thank you for participating in rulemaking. We appreciate your engagement with us today, your presence, just staying informed, giving us your feedback. We look forward to more questions, comments, and suggestions on the alternative compliance pathway. We'll see you next time. Hi, Bill. Can you unmute Bill?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, are you keeping this open for some questions? Is that accurate?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody knows that I am all for reducing our utility costs and reducing our carbon footprint. But sometimes the things that we talk about are, I don't know how to say it, but they're just not always possible for larger hospitals, especially hospitals that have our public hospital districts, maybe that don't have the funding like some of the other hospitals may have. So when we're talking about heat pumps and stuff like that, and sure, it's possible to create some gigantic electric boiler, but it'd probably be two stories tall to try to take over the steam that we're creating from 5 natural gas fired boilers. So just wanted to say that anything's possible. I mean, we could put one of those small modular reactors out in our parking lot. I don't think the neighbors would like it, but we could produce as much power as we wanted.
Yeah, thanks for the comments, Bill. That is, similar to comments we've received quite a bit from particular hospitals and public hospitals. We're trying to create some alternative compliance pathways to make it a little bit easier for all building owners. We do have a provision in this rulemaking that gives public hospital districts a clearer pathway to a financial hardship. So that would be a blanket exemption from that compliance cycle. We also have the investment criteria pathway, which would identify any energy efficiency measures that are not cost effective. So it would only require the implementation of cost effective energy efficiency measures, which in your scenario here, there might not be many. It could be the low hanging fruit of maybe a lighting package or building commissioning. Do know of a scenario of a hospital here in Washington State that just cut their emissions by over 30%, or sorry, not emissions, but their energy consumption by more than 30% just by recommissioning control mechanism.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, we've done our level 1 audit. We're looking to get our level 2 complete. And a big part of that level 2 audit was to do retro commissioning and to also install some software for energy monitoring. So I think retro commissioning is probably one of the most important things we can do in healthcare, but we're a largely inefficient group just because we're 24/7.
yeah, the
So
nature of it.
yeah, and all the air changes we have to have. But I appreciate it, and I want to do a good job, and I appreciate you guys making these, you all making some of these exceptions, and we're still going to work towards getting our EUI down, of course, but it's just sometimes it can be frustrated when people are talking about things that and part of it's me. I mean, I need to understand that we're maybe talking about smaller facilities, but the most we're the first group that's really going through 220,000 square feet and above. So,
Yeah.
when we're talking about heat pumps and such, I don't feel like that's for the June 2026 date.
Yeah, that's not really applicable to some of these situations, especially larger buildings. But for folks that's a viable option. It's a pathway that allows them to kind of avoid the investment criteria
Yeah.
requirements for one cycle.
Yeah, and for all of our heating, hot water, we're using steam to hot water generators on demand, which is pretty efficient, but it's not electric. So that's the way, for the last 15, 20 years, we've been doing steam to hot water generation on demand. But it is efficient. But then, now I feel like maybe that was the wrong decision instead of going electric. So
Yeah, it's not going to apply in every situation. And, some of this stuff through the investment criteria allows for phased implementation where you don't need to replace that cost-effective energy efficiency measure until that equipment or system is beyond its useful life.
yeah,
So thanks for your comments, Bill.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Thank you for participating.
Well, yeah, no, I've been keeping up with this and attending all these, and I appreciate what y'all are trying to do, and hopefully we can be a good partner and have an impact. So thank you.
Yeah. Brianna, thanks for being patient.
Oh, of course. No, thanks for allowing extra time for questions. And also I agree with Bill's comments. Thanks you guys for this is like really great, thoughtful information and I think you guys are doing a really good job and communicating about it. So appreciate that a lot. I was thinking back to some of the survey responses that you got about some, proposed alternative pathways, and then the two that you presented here. So I just want to make sure I understand. These are the only two you guys are considering, and given the next steps that I might not have fully understood, so are no other alternatives going to be coming forward for proposal now? Is that right?
Yeah, I can jump in. For this compliance cycle and this rulemaking, these are the two alternative pathways we're presenting.
Okay.
That said, the legislation kind of opened the door for us to evaluate and potentially implement other performance metrics like greenhouse gas emissions intensity targets or source EUI targets potentially. We just don't have the time to get that implemented to conduct those studies to kind of analyze that data and make those targets. But like Luke alluded to, we're tasked with reassessing targets and developing targets potentially for tier 2 buildings, kind of by 2029-ish in that time frame. So future compliance iterations may, we would likely have other pathways and other performance metrics potentially.
I see. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, can I
Say,
add to that?
Also, this is rulemaking time, so this is kind of the point of influence. If you receive feedback and there's and public comments, that's something that we could definitely consider during this compliance. It's still
That's what I was going to say too. If we got a comment with a comment form with a viable alternative, we could consider it.
So it sounds like those other suggestions that you guys got through those surveys didn't turn out to be you guys considered them not viable.
Well, like you pointed out, how do you set what is the appropriate amount of money to invest? How would we do that?
Yeah. What about the other one that was like compliance with other standards? Is that just because like state law already sets the standards that we have to follow, so that we wouldn't really be able to follow?
We're actually still considering that. It's it's a reality that building owners who live in or who are located in the Seattle area have the BEPS.
Right.
Our intention is to align with them always, and in the future, we are doing the study, and it's going to be specific to alignment with the BEPS. The electrification proposal is kind of our way of doing that right now. I could be mistaken on the intent of that, but certainly we would like to align with a major jurisdiction that is implementing building compliance.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. I think I wasn't super clear on that. Thanks. And then there was another question I had about the financial hardship. Luke, you mentioned there was more information about other than what was provided in the chat that for what qualifies as financial hardship. Are you saying there are more qualifications or?
Well, we have guidance documents that speak specifically of all the exemptions. So in those guidance documents, it gives some examples and some examples of documentation that would be needed in order to meet the provisions of those financial hardship exemptions. So it gets quite layered. What we do recommend is folks take a look at that guidance document first if they're interested in pursuing financial hardship exemption, and then reach out to us with the specific questions. Maybe they may be wanting to have our opinion on their specific scenario, and get some feedback from us before they actually apply for that exemption. So they make sure they have all their ducks in a row and have a legitimate financial hardship that's accepted by Commerce.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. I appreciate that. I was looking through.
I think we lost Luke.
So
Sorry.
Or
I believe James put it in the chat. I don't know if you had a chance to click on that, but
I did, yeah. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, looking through the list here, it seems like there could be other, situations where the financial hardship is not necessarily covered here. So that's good to know. I'll when we're
Yeah,
talking
it's
cities.
as you can understand, there's all sorts of different scenarios. We can't possibly think of all scenarios and examples of a financial hardship. So there is some general guidelines and guardrails, and then there may be some what we need to discuss with the client is what is their particular situation, what kind of documentation do they have for that.
Okay, so for this rulemaking, are you guys considering what other qualifications for financial hardship, or that's not part of this?
We will likely, I mean, if you've got some specific language that you feel would be useful to be codified, so you can kind of look at the current structure of section Z 3.2 and Y 3.2. That's where the exemptions are held. If you see something in there that could be added that would create more clarity and identify pathways sooner, that's fine. That'd be great if you had any ideas, send us the comments, and if we feel that it's within our purview and within the intent of the legislation to accept that kind of financial hardship, then codifying it's always good if it's clear enough.
Ellen, to add to that, the legislature did identify a couple of new exemptions that are in the language. So if you didn't go to the last workshop, there is the proposed language that would include that. So I would recommend that if somebody has that link to the proposed language from the exemption extension workshop.
I have read that thing. So yeah, it's just
okay
here, right? It's just not
okay
adopted yet. Is that the idea? It will be. So then it would be included in the
In theory, it will be, yeah, unless there's objection to it.
Okay, no, that's great. That's really helpful. Yeah, I definitely don't have anything to add to these myself. I was just thinking through communicating with cities, like trying to get their input. So that's a really good, that's good to know. Thank you so much. And thanks again for this. This is really helpful. Sorry for dominating so much.
No, we appreciate the engagement. It's better than awkward silence. Judy does not like awkward silence.
I do not like awkward silence. Can we take the last question that's in the Q&A live? I was tempted to type an answer, but then I thought it might be easier if the anonymous attendee is still here.
Hey, Judy.
Next one.
Judy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I got a couple questions. So for tier 2s, I see the guidance document for tier 1 exemption for financial hardship. What if we're in a situation where an owner has tier 2 and they have financial hardship in terms of, they don't have enough maintenance personnel to provide the maintenance evidence documentation. They don't have enough funding for training programs. They have unsafe conditions for access to equipment. If they're not compliant with the O&M elements of the O&M plan, is there an exemption pathway for tier 2?
They're very similar. They're in Annex Y. We don't have the guidance documents written for tier 2 yet. But if you go into the integrated document, you can see how similar they are, X and Y. There are some differences in the proposed language that because they don't, some of the proposed exemptions and extensions are for the performance metric only, which tier 2 does not have to comply with. So those don't apply to tier 2. Does anybody else want to jump in Because he's asking me specifically, but other people might have a better answer for you. Luke?
You know, I mean, ultimately, we would rather see some kind of effort towards meeting. I'm trying to think of your question about the energy management plan, the operations and maintenance program. If they don't have staffing to fully implement the operations and maintenance program, you know, we certainly would still like them to see them implementing the majority of it, and rather than taking the exemption based on the financial hardship there. So it's something that we could kind of discuss in a case-by-case basis, not exempting anybody from provisions of operations and maintenance program, but maybe brainstorming ideas of how to accomplish the intent of the operations and maintenance program with the staffing that a facility may have. I don't know. I'm just kind of brainstorming right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And the tool that we're going to be releasing soon with the
Mhm.
training could be
Also,
helpful.
Derek, if you could submit a comment with, you know, kind of the situation that you may represent, it helps us kind of think about it a little deeper.
Yeah, I mean, Luke and James and I have talked about this already, with owners that you know, they just don't have the resources, right? They don't have the funding, they don't have the personnel, they don't have the staff, they don't have the administrative infrastructure, you know, to be able to fulfill some of the requirements in the O&M plan, and the EMP. You know, obviously they're partially compliant, right? In our view, but they're not fully compliant because they don't have evidence of implementation because they don't have the resources, whether that be financial or personnel.
Yeah, but if they're tier 2, they only need to implement it as of the compliance date. They don't need to do the implementation a year prior, like tier 1 does.
Yeah, I guess what we're just trying to protect is to make sure that they're marked compliant with their plans.
Right, right.
So we just want to, you know, when we consult with them, we want to make sure that we're providing them with that roadmap, right, to be compliant. And we don't want to get in a situation where we submit plans and they're not fulfilling 3 or 4 compliance items with evidence.
Mhm.
And you know, we just want to be transparent. So,
Right. And
yeah.
from my
So
perspective, this is a transition to get people up and running so that they have the administrative staff and they have the systems set up in place so that in the perpetuity they can comply. So
yeah, for
just,
sure.
yeah. So,
Yeah, I know in spirit and in theory, but in reality and funding, it's not there, right? So
right, exactly.
yeah. And then the second question I had was, you know, we have multiple owners that want to do tier 2 EMPs and O&M plans. And the incentive approach right now with the payment on the back end is really prohibitive to building owner adoption, is what we're hearing and seeing. You know, is there a way to pre-reserve or pre-approve funding on the incentive side? Because, you know, owners are like, hey, I want to do this, but if there's no guarantees on the back end after this is done, how am I protected?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't know if we have anybody from our incentive teams on the call right now, but my response to that would be perhaps we can look into it, but we may not have the legislative authority to change that or to do a pre-approval or something. I will point out, I just kind of did a back of the envelope calculation on how far that 150 million would go for tier 2 buildings, and it looks like if the average size building, I think I used maybe 30,000 square feet, it would cover about 14,000 buildings, and we sent out notification for 18,000 maybe.
Mhm.
So if that's any assurance that it's likely going to be available for most building owners.
Yeah, I mean,
Luke, just
if you have any kind of supporting documentation that we could put in front of building owners to help, you know what I'm saying? Like, 'cause we're seeing a lot of
Right.
resistance right now, and we'd like to help them, but
Yeah.
they're like, hey, we can't risk it. You know, if you tell me that I have to invest X amount of dollars, right? And I had, somehow did we just need to package that message a little bit more clear with less risk for them? That's my point, I guess, for adoption.
So perhaps we can do some kind of quantification, post it on our website, and just state that this is just an estimate, but we have this much funding. If the average size building's 30,000 square feet in the state, we should have enough funding for 80% of all the buildings out there. So get on it now.
Real quick, Luke, I just want to mention that Derek is with us, and so I don't know if
Derek
if you had anything to
Derek, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, the legislation does require the submission of the energy management plan, and the O&M program, the benchmarking data. So I don't know that there's much that we could do about, upfront costs, covering those upfront costs, or, committing to any incentives, before that documentation is submitted. We are working through developing the next round of funding for the Clean Buildings Performance Grant. So I think, we're looking at, what would be eligible as far as those other the other funding that's available for this work. But as far as the incentives, the legislation, requires a submission of the documentation before it will be eligible to receive the incentive funding.
Thanks, Derek.
No more questions in the Q&A, no more virtual hands. I think we're going to call it.
Although, Annalyn, just briefly, real quick, I saw that there was a hand up earlier that went down. So
Doug,
I just wanted
did you want to ask your question?
Actually, team, good afternoon. Derek, between Derek's conversation, everybody's answers that I got taken care of. So that's I lowered my hand. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate this time very much.
Thanks, Doug. We're always available via email or our office hours on Tuesdays if you come up with any other questions.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm going to end it. For those who are still around, thank you so much for sticking around, listening to the conversation. If you have questions, feel free to submit it through buildings@commerce.wa.gov. If you have comments, please use the comment form. And then we'll take your comments into consideration as we draft our final rules. That's all we have. Have a great day.